I wrote a book this thick on Mount Sinai.
I know. In brief.
No, that's very good. No, it's good. So, most of the world around us is a complex system. I mean, there's stuff on the earth, all biology, all of social dynamics, all of cities are complex systems because they are made of lots of individual components, cells or people and so forth, and they interact and they evolve. And this is a crucial aspect of them. They evolve, they're continually changing and adapting to external conditions. And they also have what we call emergent behavior. So, for example, a city is not just the sum of all the people or the sum of all the buildings and the roads. It's much more than that. Santiago is some entity that is bigger than all the people and all the buildings and everything. So that's called an emergent behavior. So these are fundamental qualities of all of life, from cells all the way up to ecosystems and all of socioeconomic life, economies, social dynamics and so forth. So understanding how complex systems work, how all those interactions between the individual components lead to modular behavior, group behavior, collective behavior, and then emergent behavior is fundamental. And what has emerged in the last 20, 30 years is more and more focus on the bigger picture. So the traditional way is you take the system and you decompose it into all the pieces, right? And what this is saying, no, you lose an essential feature. So we must get a framework, a scientific framework for understanding the system as a whole. The great challenge in any complex system, but obviously particularly in organisms, is that we're made of, you and I have 10 to the 14th cells, 100 trillion cells, and the challenge is how do you support 10 to the 14th cells in a way that is somehow efficient and democratic, and that's the huge challenge. It's coupled with another challenge, which I don't think is mentioned in that quote, which is that on the one hand you have to supply it with energy and resources, but on the other hand you have to also supply it with information. So you have information being transmitted and energy and resources transmitted, and they have to be integrated, and we do it through networks. So that is the major challenge of any complex system, and almost all complex systems have responded by evolving networks. We discovered these scaling laws, and what they say is that, if you see that in this sort of what we call coarse-grained way, in this sort of average way, that, and I'll use the United States as an example, that despite appearances, New York is actually a scaled-up version of Los Angeles. Even though they look completely different, they have different geographies, they have different history, they even have different cultures, and yet somehow when you measure all the infrastructure, or you measure even the socioeconomic activity, whatever it is, you find that they are scaled versions. There you can actually predict. So what does this imply? This implies several things, but two in particular. One is that there must be underlying the extraordinary complexity of cities and their individuality, underlying that is a commonality, is something that's the same about all cities, a similar dynamic. And that gives rise to the idea that you could develop a serious science of cities that is quantitative and computational, and that provides the possibility of dealing with many of the big challenges that cities have as they move into the future. Because traditionally, cities have been dealt with almost by rules of thumb. If that is but that is, you say, oh, okay, this is what we did before, so it probably works now, or by some political idea that someone has, and there's almost no science in it. And that is one of the reasons many cities have ended up being not very attractive places. So it's extremely important that we develop such a science, particularly because, as I try to express in my talk, that the future of the planet is now completely determined by the future of the cities. The cities are dominating the planet, and until we understand what is happening in cities, what their organization is, what their underlying dynamic is, and what the principles are, we will not be able to attack long-term global sustainability. So, and in fact, I have a somewhat provocative view of that if we only focus on one of those issues, like global warming, which is incredibly important, and everything is focused on that, and then we forget that it's interconnected with everything else, we're destined for failure.